Hi, I'm Diane Nutbrown, and I'm an assistant professor of chemistry at Emporia State University. I primarily teach introductory chemistry courses like Chem 1 and Chem 2 with their associated labs, and inorganic chemistry at both the sophomore and then advanced levels, and there is one lab associated with that. I have prior teaching experience at a couple of small liberal arts colleges, including Juniata College and Allegheny College, which are both located in the state of Pennsylvania. And then I also taught a 205-person lecture at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the fall of 2011. So I have taught small courses, as small as 6 people in an advanced inorganic class, and as large as the 200-plus stadium seat lecture at UW-Madison. So one of the things that I had noticed at Allegheny, which is a smaller school, was that students didn't know people's names in their lab section. For instance, I would say, oh, that reagent is over by John. And they'd say, well, I don't know who John is. And I thought, how is that possible? Because I call everybody by their name, and you have had a lab with them for half a semester. That also came up again this past spring in our Chem 2 lecture section. And again, we were a few weeks into things. So it was after the first exam that I started asking students to introduce themselves, and they would pick a random question out of a beaker and have to answer that. And I didn't make it known at the time that the students would ultimately be sort of quizzed on this later. It was just a way, I thought, of getting people to know each other and building a community in the classroom. So this particular class already had a fairly good dynamic. It was just that they were lacking some of those details, like people's actual names. And so I feel like that cohort really gelled very nicely. Already in class, they're talking to one another during iClicker questions or when we have worksheets for problem solving. Chemistry is not a class that is primarily lecture-based. We do a lot of problem solving, and so they interact with one another to check to see if they are approaching things the same way for a word problem, if they're getting the same numerical answers. So there's a decent amount of interaction already in the class, and just adding this extra layer really, I think, helped bring people together and saw commonalities of things that they liked to do or experiences that they've had in the past. And so right before the second exam, I then made a note that everything we do in class is done for a reason. I have a purpose for everything. And although I wasn't going to test them directly on their knowledge of their peers, it would be a bonus opportunity because it wasn't a learning objective, right? And people got really into it. I mean, already Chem 2, you have students who are successful in the sciences and are very focused. And so for them, any sort of points are worth working toward. And as you may know, if you were at ESU, we have photo rosters on Blackboard now. So I literally had students in my class printing out the rosters and quizzing one another and then asking, like, I don't even remember what my question was, and then they're like, oh, Paige, it was, what book had you recently read? And she was like, oh, that's right. And I'm glad actually I was there for that conversation because I had forgotten what book she had read. But anyway, it wasn't something that I had intended doing at the beginning, but then I thought, oh, this would be great to have them be quizzed. Now, I did it again this year in Chem 1. And there were many more students in the class, so we didn't get through everybody before the second exam. But I was a little disappointed because they didn't seem to take as much of an interest in it as they had the previous semester. So like any teaching technique that you have, sometimes it works better with one group of students than another, and so you just have to adjust. And with this particular Chem 1 class, I gave them then a whole other unit for us to just take a break from it, and then I've started doing it again now. And I think people feel comfortable in the classroom. And that was really one of my goals, was to just get people to feel like they have, again, a sense of belonging, which is something that harkens all the way back to when I was in AmeriCorps Vista working with the Boys and Girls Clubs of Metro Spartanburg. So you have a sense of belonging, usefulness, power and influence, and competency is what they like to instill in their members. And so I try to incorporate that when possible in my teaching. So I guess if what I'm trying to talk about is community building, I would say having a lot of group work, having a lot of discussions, a good free-form question-answer, and then this extra layer seems to have worked well. I think that I will continue doing this in all of the introductory level courses that I teach. I did not do it in my advanced inorganic chemistry course because there just weren't that many people to start with, and they already knew each other because they had been going through the program together. And so on the first day, I simply had us sitting around in a circle and asked people to do an icebreaker activity like 2 truths and a lie. But I feel like in that class, we still had factions, primarily because it was diverse in terms of the origin of the students. We have a contingent from Asia, for instance, and they seem to be more comfortable working together. And so I haven't done as good of a job trying to make sure that there is a better intermingling and mix of students in the class like that. They all know who each other is, so it wasn't a problem with people not knowing other people's names. I don't know, I think outside of class, for our chemistry and BMB majors, the biochemistry and molecular biology, I know that it's not obvious to them who is also in their major. So little things like putting together a bulletin board with pictures of the students who are majoring in that field and a little information about themselves as to what year they are and such. And so I would say that just as a result of what we had done in Chem 2 last semester, there is definitely a strong cohort of students who work together. They formed study groups for organic chemistry this year. They've gone and cheered one another for sporting events. So I feel like part of what we are doing is helping people find friends as well, you know, finding people with the same sorts of interests and people that they can go through these classes with and, again, feel this sense of community. And actually, we had done sort of a mini portfolio. It wasn't as ideally executed as I might have liked for Chem 2 lab. And one of the questions that I had asked was if this was an experience that they think would parallel working in a group in industry or in some other professional setting. And I had several students comment about how they would only hope to have a professional working group that worked as well as their lab group had. And that not only, you know, have I met peers, you know, for lab reports and such, but I've made lifelong friends. And, you know, these connections that they were making with their fellow lab mates, I thought was a real positive bonus to the experience of having them work in a group all through the semester and doing group lab reports or group presentations, especially when they had their project labs. So they really liked those experiences that were more real world and having to work together to put something more formal together. And so that's, I guess, one more area where we have tried to build a community, and it seems to have worked. I hope it was useful to somebody, and I am definitely happy to have a conversation with somebody in real time if anybody has any other great ideas.